Welcome to the newest episode of Losing Your Mind with Chris Cosentino. I am here in Portland, Oregon at Jackrabbit Restaurant, sitting down with Ben Jacobsen of Jacobsen Salt. Welcome, Bacon.
Thanks. You call me.
See, I just combined your last name and your first name together. That's Bacon.
Are you calling me fatty?
No, I'm not. You've been running, dude. You're doing good. That was awesome. I like that.
Thank you.
So what's going on, Ben? You've created something that I think a lot of folks don't understand how, one, you created it, and two, the lengths that you went to create. You and I met in San Francisco when you showed up in Encanto with a couple packets of salt and tried to explain to me the difference, and which you did. But I mean, that was what, almost
7-8 years ago?
It was pretty much the first year Feast started.
Yeah.
So that would be 8 years ago.
Yeah.
8 years ago in the summer you came.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came up here for Feast that September. And then we connected more while we were here. So, I mean, why don't we start there? I mean, I think what you did was really unique and, you know, figuring out about Netarts Bay and really discovering how to branch into a market that everybody, I mean, you're literally, you take it for granted. It's on the periodic table. You know, it's like, hey, it's salt, but it's more than that.
Yeah, it totally is. It, I mean, it wasn't, and I think that we're still kind of, in my mind, we've got a long way to go in terms of where I want our brand and our products to be, because I think that I fundamentally believe that nutrition is a human right, and that people should be eating well as best they can every single meal, every single day, and as a result, like, you know, I wasn't exposed to good salt until I was 32 years old, and from that moment on, it changed my life. And
so you're saying that iodized salt is not good?
Exactly, yeah, like all that Morton shit, and the diamond and everything that people use in their kitchens, and professional kitchens, but also like at home. Like, I grew up with, my mom was a great cook at home and nothing fancy, but like didn't grow up with eating great salt. And so when I finally discovered good salt, I was just blown away by how much better it is. You want some for your granola there?
No, I don't want it. I do not need some for my yogurt. Thank you.
But I'm consistently blown away. Like, and I've said it a million times, but I think it's phenomenally, I think it's crazy how we're the first company to harvest salt in the Pacific Northwest since Lewis and Clark. And that speaks to you and to me, like, the volumes of how easily such a massive category and product is overlooked and taken for granted, for that matter. And so when I started Jacobsen, there was no other great salt producers in the country that were doing great finishing salt. And so we really were the first ones in the entire country to make this happen. And I think that's I'm still kind of humbled by that every single day. But frankly, like, I remember sitting with you, even I think it was before I came into Encanto, at the Ferry Building, in the restaurant next to Bocalone, and sitting down with you and nearly shitting my pants because I was sitting down with you, and like, you're this big famous chef, and I was this guy from Oregon and like bringing salt in, but we connected on such a real human level, and you gave a shit about what we were doing, and I getting goosebumps right now thinking about that. But like, that's real. And so those connections that I continue to make every single day, like, matter to me.
Yeah, I think, when you look at salt, I mean, you're looking at minerals, you're looking at flavor profiles, you're looking at texture, right? But also the fact that you're in the States, it's not being shipped from abroad. There's lower carbon footprint. There's a lot of big steps involved there. But I think, explain to folks how this first started. Because, I mean, there's images of you carrying 5-gallon pails. There's the story that a lot of people don't really understand. You know, it's like, this didn't just happen overnight. This wasn't a situation where it's like, hey, you know, this is easy. Because I think perception versus reality, everything in life takes a lot of work, right? And you go through a lot to get to where you want to be. Sometimes they're great. Sometimes they're horrible. Let's be honest, right?
Totally.
And, you know, what you've created and what it started as to what it is now are two totally different things, right? So you were harvesting water from Netarts Bay, correct?
Yeah. By hand, 5-gallon buckets, you're right, and pouring it through paper coffee filters into 55-gallon drums, and then eventually into wine totes. It was crazy. And then in all of that in a rented U-Haul truck that I would then drive back to Portland. You know, it's an 1.5-hour drive over the pass, and so I bought some ratchet straps at Harbor Freight, like this cheap, you know, industrial supply company, and ratchet strapped the wine totes to the back of the U-Haul, in the back of the U-Haul, and then drove to Portland to a commissary kitchen and effectively started the salt making process there, which, you know, began on a Friday afternoon, and then if I was lucky, you know, finished up on a Tuesday morning. But I would, you know, wouldn't get more than, you know, half-hour of sleep per day during that time period, because I was the only one doing it and had to be monitored.
So now you've graduated from that, driving the 1.5 hours back into the city after putting on waders to go out into the water, which, you know, I know this story because you would have to go out waist deep to get clean water, right? So you're not stirring up sediment and pulling in sand and funk from the bottom, which still you'd have to strain anyways because it has to go through a paper filter to get any particulates out, because you don't want sand in the salt, which people I think don't realize there's multiple layers of the process to get it to the final end means. So now you've acquired a space out at Netarts Bay, which used to be, from what I understand, an oyster farm.
Oyster farm, yeah. It's we have an old oyster farm on Netarts Bay. You've been there.
Yep.
I finagled my way into you and Jeremy cooking a dinner out there without the stoves or ovens working.
Without the stoves or ovens working, which we found out a half an hour before we started cooking because the insides were rusted out.
Oh my God.
Well, that's also something that's very interesting is, like, as you're processing this seawater, you have tons of steam, right? Natural steam. But what that's doing is also it naturally corrodes things that are around it.
It's an incredibly corrosive environment. You think about, like, just, you know, a house on the ocean and like the you know, the corrosion that happens on the, you know, anything metal that's on the house, or, you know,
or even just the abuse the paint takes from ocean water, the spray naturally in the air. You have to repaint a home every year. Yeah,
exactly. And then you take that and you intensify it by, you know, by multiple factors. And because you're dealing with not only condensed brine, seawater, you know, which is even saltier, but also the heat. And it's just like things are demolished out there. Like it's crazy how much money and equipment we've been through because of, like, just, you know, a wrench is left out. Like, you leave a crescent wrench out and it's not usable in 2 days. It's crazy. And, you know, those $10, you know, crescent wrenches or whatever they are add up quickly.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, you know, anybody who has worked on a fishing boat or sailed or been around the ocean understands the corrosiveness of the ocean. I mean, you look at vehicles that are parked near the beach, somebody who has a beach home, their car erodes.
You grew up on the East Coast. Like, you remember salt on the roads and everybody's cars are rusted out.
Rusted out on the bottoms. Yeah. So, I mean, that's definitely a big component of it. So, you know, since you've now introduced having the facility, you know, and being able to pump, you literally have a pump now that goes out into the bay pretty far. How far out does that pump?
It's about 100 yards out.
And then it comes in, it filters it as the water's coming in.
Yep. Filters it as it's coming in. It's a 2-inch PVC line, which is pretty underwhelming. Like, when you get there, it's like, oh, that's it. But it works. And that's really all we need. And so we've got a pump and a pipe, and then we have holding tanks of seawater on shore, and then we filter it all the way down to 1 micron, which is really, really small. And then we boil it to remove the volume of the seawater, but most importantly, I don't know if you remember when you were out there, to remove the calcium and magnesium. And the calcium and magnesium scales to the bottoms of our pots, and it's crazy. It's just, it comes out as hard rock. And then we move the brine to very shallow stainless steel evaporation pans, where the salt crystals form on the surface, then kind of fall to the bottom like a leaf falling from a tree or a snowflake, really, really slowly and kind of gracefully. And then we harvest the salt crystals from the bottom of the pan and let them drain and then dry. Takes now about 2 weeks from seawater to dry flake of salt. And we've got to, that's also, I think, the cool thing is, like, we now employ, 13 people out there in an industry that didn't exist in Oregon before. And so we've created 13 jobs literally out of seawater and thin air.
But also, you're also creating 13 jobs in an area that didn't have those. There's not a lot of opportunity for employment in that area.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the majority of our folks are ex-loggers, ex-fishermen. Our coast ops manager actually used to be a cook at the schooner. I think we went there when you were out there.
Yeah, schooner's fun. It's so fun.
Yeah, Rachel Paxawan is our ops manager out there, and she's phenomenal. And but she, kind of wanted to get out of cooking every single day, and now she works for us, and it's great.
So I think when you start to look at salt, now you're producing a flake salt, you're also producing the kosher salt, which is a byproduct of making the flake salt.
Yeah.
So can you explain how that happens? Because I think there's definitely a difference of salt, right, between a traditional kosher as well as there being a flake. And I don't think people understand how the two are made at the same time. Yeah. So I think that's really important. Also, what defines it as kosher?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Okay, yeah, so two things. One, there are always a couple of periods of time during the year that we cannot make flake salt. And I only found out, come to find out years later why that was happening. And it's because crabs are molting, Dungeness crab are molting in the bay. And so Dungeness crab, when they're wiggling out of their shells, release collagen. And that collagen prohibits flake salt formation. And
how in the hell did you figure that out?
I was literally having a beer with an oyster farmer buddy of mine at the schooner, and I was like, it was, I don't know, rainy on a Tuesday, November night or whatever, and I was like, I can't figure it out. Nobody, we've looked at every single piece of data and everything, and he's like, well, the crabs are molting right now, and so I was like, yeah. And anyway, so we then went back and tested it, and it turned out that it was the collagen, which is crazy. And so, but that took years to figure out. And so, but during that time,
but that's amazing that nature,
yes,
natural everyday occurrence that happens every season, preventing nature from doing its own normal thing, which is collagen preventing the crystallization of salts.
Yes, it's crazy.
But who would have ever thought? I mean, but also that brings into such simple things as, if the crabs are molting at that time in the water, if somebody is allergic to shellfish, can they swim without having an allergic reaction? Or is anything else affected by that? Is the fish affected? So that's actually a really interesting, like, I would have never
blew my mind. It was crazy, and still to this day we learn. I mean, we're constantly learning. We're 8 years old as a company, and we learn stuff all the time. And
nature's way smarter than us.
Way smarter. I mean, we're out on the edge of the continent out there, and it's incredibly humbling. And we're just a tiny little piece on this rock floating through space. And we're here for such a short period of time. It's crazy. But oh yeah, so anyway, so during this period of time, I wasn't able to make flake salt, and I didn't want to sell our fine grain salt as flake salt, because when you use our salt, it's super light and flaky, and and even though I could have just labeled it as flake salt and kind of said, all right, enough with that. We started to stock up tens of thousands of pounds of kosher salt, at that time we called it mineral salt. And the mineral salt, we called it mineral salt because it was still light and flaky, but not quite as nearly as flaky as our pure flake salt. And so and we put it in 10-pound bags and then stacked the bags, and it was enough to we filled up half a room. It was immense, tens of thousands of pounds of salt. I think at one point we had 35,000 pounds, and it very much looked like a cocaine operation on the coast. And but then we're like, why don't we just sell a fine grain salt? The salt still tastes delicious. It's just not flake salt, and I didn't want to try and pass it off as such. And so did a little research and come to find out, kosher salt, the only thing that makes a salt kosher is the designation of, or getting that kosher salt designation. And so we literally pay a rabbinical organization X dollars a year to use their trademark symbol to call it kosher salt.
They come out and make sure you follow protocols.
Yep. But the funny thing is we're not doing a single thing differently than what we would do otherwise.
But that also shows you that there's nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's inherently,
it's inherently kosher.
Yeah. And the reason we chose to call it kosher salt is because granted, if you look at cookbooks everywhere else in the world except for the US, nobody calls for kosher salt. It's sea salt, it's gray salt, whatever it is. Americans have somehow gotten used to this term of kosher salt. And there's no particular reason why. It's just become kind of a standard unit of measurement, almost like a Kleenex or.
Well, that's actually a pretty easy answer, because for years there was only two styles of salt available in the U.S.
Yes.
Which was iodized and kosher. Kosher being the unprocessed with no iodine, right? So when you look at that process, there was two options available, and at that time, kosher salt was clean. It's a mineral salt. So the chef community went with that.
Yep.
It has a better feel on your finger.
Yep.
You know how much you're using, and there's controls put in, right? You can feel the control.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the iodized salt was perfect little squares. If you actually, that's why you can balance a salt shaker on it. And restaurants didn't want to use that because it was just one-dimensional, right? It literally fit the periodic table, whereas the other ones had nuances, flavor, and could be used in different ways. So that's how it became the norm here, whereas all throughout the rest of the world, sea salt, every different name you can imagine, because that was their norm.
Yes.
That iodized salt is not the norm in those countries.
Yeah. And before the Industrial Revolution here, we had good salt. But then the Industrial Revolution came along and started to iodize it, and it became commodity. And that was fine because it made it cheaper and more accessible to people, but it also lowered the quality of it. So it oftentimes, I think, takes looking back to figure out your way forward. And so, you look back and that was the inflection point of quote unquote bad salt in America, was the Industrial Revolution. And so
it's interesting. You start to think about those times. If you even look, you could go way back and you can go to Europe, and in Florence, in Italy, they're known for their bread going stale every day, right? Part of those reasons is they chose not to use salt because of the salt tax. So they refused to use salt in their bread as a way of not just like, we're going to protest. We're not going to put salt in the bread, so you're not going to get our money.
Yep.
Silent
protest.
Silent protest. But now the bread is still the same way without salt, and forever. But it just goes to show you, salt has played such a major role, and the two simple things in life, salt and pepper. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. We've taken them for granted, and I think it's pretty interesting to just use, Florence, for example. You go there, there's no salt in the bread. It's now historically been that way for years and years and hundreds of years because of a salt tax.
Yes. That's so cool.
And then you come now to the States, and then you have the Industrial Revolution, You have the mechanizing of salt through the mines and the perfect little squares, the iodization. And then now you have a resurgence of wanting to go back to the old school ways. And I know of restaurants that make their own salt. I mean, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Yeah. And it's, that's the thing. It's easy to make salt. It's not rocket science whatsoever, but it's difficult to make great salt consistently.
Correct.
And that's what we, strive for, but also struggle with every single day. And the other thing, too, worth noting is that, all of the oysters in North America are genetically the exact same oyster. So the oyster that you grew up with in Rhode Island is genetically the exact same oyster as on the Oregon coast, is the same as Tamales Bay, is the same as Chesapeake Bay. And the only difference, in the taste of that oyster, of course, oysters, it's salty, it's briny, it tastes like an oyster, but they taste totally different. And anybody who knows oysters and who appreciates oysters understands that. And genetically, like, we're all those little bivalves are the exact same, but it's just the environment that they grew up in.
What they eat, the salt quantity and levels, the temperature of the water dictates not only their size and their shape and how they grow, but the flavor profiles that they're based upon.
Yeah.
And I think so. You went from flake to 30,000 pounds of, kosher salt.
Yeah.
And
decided to put you on the side of a box.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I think you really, and then you started like dabbling in different flavorings. You've doing, which is, I think one of my favorites is the Pinot Noir salt, because you're utilizing what is part of Oregon's Pinot Noir. And you're actually, why don't you explain how that happens? Because I understand how it happens, but I think, listeners don't understand the process.
Yeah. So the Pinot Noir salt it's gotten more simple the way it's happened over the past, I don't know, couple of years, but we put Pinot Noir and Oregon Pinot Noir in spray bottles, condense it first, and then spray it over our salt, turning it over by hand, and then dehydrate it in between each time, and until it achieves the right level of color, aroma, and flavor that we want. But I think even one of my favorite salts that we do right now is our black garlic salt. And I learned about black garlic. I don't know if you ever went to Bar Tartine in San Francisco. I remember Nick and Courtney's black garlic potatoes, and I had never had black garlic before. And I was like, how do you make this? What is this? And so Nick and Courtney taught me how to make black garlic. I came back here to Portland, got a little rice cooker, actually.
The crock pot rice cooker method. So folks, just to break this down in simplicity, and I'll tell you, Bill Corbett, the pastry chef, taught me how to make it. Buy a rice cooker, put a couple heads of garlic in it, get it going, and guess what? You're going to get black garlic at a quarter of the price. That was the big to-do. I remember that. Thanks, Bill Corbett.
It's so rich and caramelly and sweet, and it is just totally transformed. And I'm just, to me, it's fun to take inspiration from people that I work with. And so I learned how to make black garlic from Nick and Courtney at Bar Tartine, and now we have a black garlic salt. And so we make black garlic 300 pounds at a time, and then dry it out, and then blend it up into our salt.
What fucking rice cooker do you have that cooks 300?
It's a bigger rice cooker now. It's like one of those 10-cup versions.
Oh, okay. What's interesting is, I remember coming out and you and I talking about, okay, let's make some flavored salts. And I remember you and I pouring wine into the evaporator bins with the ocean water to bring the flavor in, instead of the way you're doing it now. And you've changed the process because you've found it has better flavor nuances, which I think, you and I did fish sauce salt.
Oh my God. Yes, we did.
We've done.
That was terrible.
It came out really funky, that one, because we poured how many gallons of fish sauce into the ocean? It was
at least 2 to 3 gallons. It was crazy.
It was the aroma in there. I remember your staff. I remember getting emails from your staff saying they hate me. I was like, but no, this is going to be awesome. And its salt worked for what we wanted it for.
Yes.
But the aroma, and if I'm correct, you had to throw away that pan.
We threw away the pan. It took a good 2 weeks to kind of get the odor out of the dehydrator.
I remember everybody was pissed at me, like the nasty grams I was getting. And I was like, Ben, I don't think your staff likes me anymore. Because people were literally wearing, what do you call, like, I call it a SARS mask, like those respirator masks, because they wouldn't even walk into the room because it was like, it literally smelled like a rotten fish factory.
But I think that,
it was a learning curve. We all learned from that. And I think that was what was fun, because at that point, you and I were like, hey, let's pour white wine. Let's pour red wine. Let's try. And we were like banging ideas off. We even tried to pour honey in one.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That was a mess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think one special thing about what we do is the fact that we aren't afraid to innovate. It's in our DNA. It's in my DNA to kind of look at things differently and challenge the norm. And so everybody in the company constantly comes forward with ideas about ways that we could do things better or differently or not at all, frankly. And like we just launched our the Jacobsen seasonings, and one of the seasonings that's in that line is our ramen seasoning, and that came from our sales manager Courtney Parento. And Courtney was like, "What if we did like those ramen packets that you get in like the shitty ramen?" Like, yeah, they're delicious. What if we did like a ramen seasoning so you can put it on everything? And it was her idea, and now it's such a delicious product, and it also has MSG in it, like real ramen seasoning should.
There's nothing wrong with MSG.
No, nothing.
Not if it's used in a proper method.
And there's nothing wrong with salt either.
No, I think look, if you have a health issue where your doctor deems that you're not supposed to have salt, well then eat accordingly.
Yes.
I think seasoning is mandatory with food, but it's also less is more. And I think you can always add to something. You can never take salt out.
Yes.
And I think that's been the learning curve for a lot of people, is like add a little, adjust, taste. I mean, my number one thing is acid and herbs before salt, because when you add the acid and the herbs and then you hit it with salt, it's bright. Mm-hmm. If you just go salt first and then add the acid and herbs, you're defeating the purpose.
That's a really good distinction. And so much of your food to me is such a reflection of that, of acid and herbs and then a sprinkle of salt. And it's very layered like that. And I've never thought about it that way.
Because if you think about it from the fact of, okay, let's add salt, it opens your palate, but acid and herbs do too. So if you add your acid and herbs to the point where you think you want them and then you hit it with a little bit of salt, it heightens everything and your palate opens and everything comes forward. So acid and herbs before salt. And it really, it's healthier. It's more controlled because, as we all know, people can be very heavy-handed with salt, and you want multiple bites to be consistent. So if you season something to the point of where you think it's perfect on the first bite, by bite 3 or 4, you're overdone. It's too much salt content.
Acid and herbs before salt. I love that.
People think
it's so simple, but it's so fundamental.
I can't take credit for that. That's Mark Miller. Like, that's Mark Miller beating that into me from day one of my working with him. Acid and herbs before salt. Actually, it used to be like, Chris, that needs more acid. It needs more herbs. God, Mark, I miss you. I don't see him enough. He pushed. But I think that's really relevant. So moving on from salts and flavored salts, you then started working with somebody locally working with honey. So what made that connection for you, salt to honey?
Yeah. So we did. So actually, so before that, we had launched our line of salty black licorice, and for a salt company to do that,
the licorice everybody freaks out over. By the way,
it's delicious.
Huh? I mean, that's like can you even keep up anymore?
Yeah, we can. Fortunately, it's totally polarizing. But I bring up the licorice and the salty caramel to kind of as kind of evidence of the way we think innovatively as a salt company. And what seasoning company in the world comes out with a line of candies? That's ridiculous. And And we did that.
That's very freaky deaky Dutch of you.
But we did that because I used to live in Denmark and then Norway, and I missed salty black licorice, and I was like, well, I got a salt company. Why don't we make some salty black licorice? And we did, and it was well received, which is great. And then Williams-Sonoma, one of our customers, asked us to make a salty caramel, and so we were like, yeah, duh, let's do that. So that went well. That gave us the confidence to then go ahead and be like, because ultimately, like, we've at Whole Foods or New Seasons or Williams-Sonoma, we're in the salt section, and that's great. But it gave us the confidence to be in another section on the shelf in that same retailer. And what that allowed us to do then was think differently about food and the way food should be. And so Be Local came along. Damien, the founder of Be Local, was a buddy of mine. And, Be Local, we had started at the same time. Jacobsen had grown much, much bigger than Be Local during that time. And Be Local was effectively going to go out of business. And so we offered Damien space. And then we said, hey, do you want us to, do you want to move in with us? It'll lessen your rent load, and you can not pay anything, and we can keep the ship afloat. He said sure. And then we said, hey, do you want us to start delivering your honey to stores, because we're sending 2 trucks out a day. He said sure. And then we were like, hey, do you want us to start selling your honey? And he was like, sure, because we're already making that sales call or that email or whatever. And then so ultimately it just made sense to combine the companies, and really where I think that I see the company is focusing on just really great pantry staples and seasonings, and salt and honey being kind of the core of those fundamentals. You say acid and herbs, and I don't know where you would add sweetness or honey to that kind of acid, herb, salt trifecta, but honey is as Samin wrote in her book, Sweet, Salt, Acid, Heat. It's like those are largely the fundamentals of building flavor.
For sure. And I think each honey has its own nuance. I mean, there's so much depth in each style, so much color variation. Again, that goes along with where the bees are feeding, what they're pollinating, and the flavor profiles change dramatically.
Yep. Yeah, so we've when we acquired Be Local, they had 10 hives, and Jacobsen, we now have 125 hives, employ 2 part-time beekeepers, which is just cool, because like, who employs beekeepers? I think that's incredible, and it's a large part of our business for sure. But it also gives chefs, our customers and folks that we work with, access to great honey that they might not have had access to before. And just like salt as a super effective like elemental seasoning, honey can be the same.
Yeah, I mean, there's what's really interesting is, for years, honey was the sugar. Mm-hmm. There was no processed sugar. There was no brown sugar. There was no, turbinado sugar or cane sugar. It was straight up, you would have honey to season your food, or maple syrup at those times, right? So when you start looking at those nuances, whether you compare a buckwheat honey, which has bitter notes to it, and it's super dark,
barnyardy,
yeah, or you have a clover honey, which is going to be light and golden and a little cleaner, and then you can start looking at what else, where else are the hives living, or do some have pine nuances to them? Do some have fruit nuances to them? So hives can be put anywhere, whether they're put into a field for growing pumpkins, right? Or they can just be left in the woods, or you could put them on the roof of the building.
Yeah, absolutely. We have beehives all around the rooftops of downtown Portland, and that's the honey that comes from each and every hive is very, very nuanced, and a honey that is a block away from a rooftop on another building will be totally different. And that's just proof positive that what bees eat matters, and it's a reflection of the environment that they live in, just like salt.
So if you're on a rooftop that has a wood burning oven in the building, you're going to have smoky notes to it.
Probably will have some smokiness to it. Yeah, I mean, winemakers in the in Oregon, we had the forest fires in the gorge a couple of years ago, and winemakers in Oregon I know are making wine with elements of those forest fires in that wine. It's just crazy, but it's just like it goes all the way through.
Do you want to drink an ashtray? I don't think that sounds good. I mean, I like smoky food, but I don't like to drink liquid smoke.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the same thing happened through Napa. I mean, we lost tons and tons and tons of grapes and wines. And so, I mean, there's so many moving parts now with what Jacobsen started as and to what it is now.
Yeah.
I mean, you now have a downtown location where you have an open studio where you do cooking classes. You have guest chefs come in.
You stopped in to make a tomahawk steak for us one time when we were doing a photo shoot.
That was all by chance.
Completely by chance.
And you do on-site events and you do dinners. So what's next? I mean, well, let me roll back a little bit. So let's talk about how you got to salt. Let's be really honest. Like, you were... This wasn't it's not like you started in a kitchen and said,
no,
hey, I'm over, working like crazy and I don't want to get burned anymore. I want to do something different. You were in a different world.
I was in a totally different world and totally different line of work. I headed up before in Norway. I was working for a internet company. I was heading up global marketing. And so I've got a good background in that and product management and went from there to start up a .com, for lack of a better word, in Portland, which slowly and painfully failed over the course of 2.5 years and drained all of my savings. But during that slow, painful death, I was learning how to make salt. And that learning how to make salt, I had no ambition or even kind of foresight into like, let's make a business out of this. I simply wanted to learn how to make great salt, because I missed the great salt that I had living in different parts of the world. And the only thing that you can get, the only type of salt that you can get at that time, this was 10 years ago, was Maldon or French fleur de sel. And Maldon, you could only get at Williams Sonoma, and you could only get at like really, really high-end kitchen shops. And then occasionally you would spot a fleur de sel. Now you find Maldon for $4.99 at Walmart, literally across the country. And which is
I mean, you can, and a lot of that you can attest to food television with chefs on the show saying, I like to finish my dish with some nice flake salt.
Yes.
So that became the demand
yes.
from so many of the public saying, well, where do I get that? I want what that chef's using on TV.
Absolutely.
Or I want what I see on, Top Chef, or whether it was Iron Chef America or whatever. They see them finishing with this salt and they want that.
Yep.
So, I mean, it created a national demand.
Yeah, it was,
which is amazing, because considering it was the norm in Europe.
Yes, exactly.
And it's
nothing new.
Like Celle Girard, if you were in France, you would buy bags, and that was their version of your straight up like kosher, and then you would get flake salt to finish.
Yes.
And we take a lot of those things, like you said. You were in Europe, you were working there, and it was the norm.
Mm-hmm.
So also, I think, one of the things that you were doing prior to going to Europe, I mean, you were racing on the velodrome.
I was racing in the velodrome. I was racing on the road, racing crits. And I mean, bike racing was my life. When I was 16 to 23, 24, something like that, bike racing was my life. I wanted to be a pro bike racer. And it was my world, much as it was your world. And riding 400 miles a week and was kind of just what I did, and going to training camp every year in Windsor, California, just north of Santa Rosa, and then to Olympic Training Center and back in Colorado Springs. And it was all I ever wanted. And such a huge part of my life. Sports are so important, like, for people, and it's just that competitive outlet and that source of kind of endorphin creation that is, I think, important.
So you raced on the velodrome for how many years?
I raced in the velodrome for 3 years. Yeah. Broke my collarbone on it. Still, it's like collarbone broke in half, and it's healed like that. You can still feel the bump.
So you have an overlap.
It's a good like 3/4 of an inch overlap. Yeah.
Dude, that won't break again though.
Exactly.
It's now
Not at
stronger.
all.
Now it's stronger.
Fused.
It's doubled up. It's fused. So I think, that's a good point. Like, and that's how the connection really started was somebody said, hey, this guy rides and you should meet. And it just kept on rolling from there. And I think, and from that now you participate every year in Chef Cycle and you're a part of the Sack Lunch program.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. You and Chris Domino got me into Chef Cycle. And I remember, of course I used to race bikes long time ago and loved it. But I was after starting a business and, when I raced bikes, I was 162 pounds and I'm 6'2". And now I just weighed myself the other day and I weigh 205, but I'm down 20 pounds.
It's impossible to get under 200 now. I can't get past. I'm trying my damnedest. I can't get under 202.
You've got huge quads though.
It's amazing though how much, and just I think this upcoming year will be year 6, if I'm correct, for Chef Cycle.
It'll be my 4th.
It'll be your 4th.
Yes.
It'll be the 6th year of its anniversary of Chef Cycle. But I think what's happened with that is we're seeing everybody get back on their bike, having a better balance, training. I think cycling's great for our industry because you're not standing. I personally don't find that running's super great for chefs because we're already standing on our feet and the pounding can be a little much, and cycling's pretty low impact. Yeah. Unless you hit the ground, which we try not to very often.
Yeah. And like for me it was a forcing function of finding balance because Jacobsen Salt is 8 years old now, and the first 6 years of starting my company, it was completely all consuming. Like there's nothing else. I couldn't even fathom going for a run or a bike ride because I was so busy and so sleep deprived and stressed and everything else. But once I began to tell myself that it was okay to slow down and to go for a bike ride, go for a walk, go for a hike, go for a run, my life became what it used to be, which was so much better than this completely all-consuming work mode with no kind of escape. And it's that balance that I love for sure.
I mean, there's something to be said for 300 chefs riding 300 miles. This past year was pretty brutal for everybody. I mean, day 1 was gorgeous. Day 2 was gnarly. Day 3 was atrocious. I couldn't even sit on the bike. Day 3, I had a pretty bad injury from Campovelo that I couldn't even get on the bike.
Yeah.
But day 2 and 3 were not, I mean, they cut the course.
Yeah, it was a hard couple of days on the bike for sure.
Well, especially for a lot of folks that came from the East Coast.
Oh.
They were thinking, we're going to go to the sun. It's California. And it was colder in San Francisco and Santa Rosa than it was actually in New York and where all they were coming from. The Canadians did great because it didn't even faze them.
I got to tell you, the feeling of being on the bike with 300 other chefs and kind of culinary related people is so powerful. And my favorite feeling of all in Chef Cycle is when you ride by schools. And you ride by schools that are directly impacted by the money that Chef Cycle raises. And it just is, oh man, you just see like these little kids out there cheering for you in the rain and the cold and the sunshine and whatever.
That was pretty, oof. I think this past year wasn't, I think the year previous, the year after the fires, and having the kids stand on the side of the road after their school had burnt down was unbelievable. I mean, it literally, there's no words to put to that moment where the program that we helped fund by riding this ride was still helping to feed these kids, even though their school wasn't there. And the school was their only means of getting a meal. So that was pretty awe-inspiring, being able to, and like having people stop and like hang out with the kids. That was, for me, probably the biggest moment ever. And I think that was us climbing up Mark Lane, and their school was gone and they were all on Mark Lane, like right at the four-way stop. Remember, as we're climbing, and I think coming back this past year, and everything was green and lush, and there's new buildings being put in, and it goes to show you, like, we take things for granted.
We do take things for granted, and you know what? Like, I believe that nutrition is a fundamental human right. I believe that every person on the planet should have access to nutrition. And I believe that every person on the planet should have access to healthcare. Unfortunately, our political system isn't set up for that quite yet, but I think we are beginning to turn the corner. And ultimately, like, we're on this earth for a very short period of time. And so we might as well do what we can to make sure every one of us is taken care of.
Well, that short time on this planet shouldn't suck. You shouldn't worry about the next meal. You shouldn't worry about
if you get sick and can't afford to pay.
If you're going to go to school and get shot, like these things shouldn't even be questions.
No, it's, and call me a socialist. I don't care, but I spent 5 years in Scandinavia, and I had an emergency appendectomy when I was there, and I was laying in the hospital bed. Ended up spending about a week there, and laying in the hospital bed on my third day, and kind of was woozy and waking up, and I asked the nurse, hey, are you going to give me papers to sign for the cost of this? And she said, no, your only job here is to get better. And like that should be the norm for every person on the planet.
Yeah. I mean, I think unless somebody has left the country and had an experience like you just mentioned, they don't realize that, that's an option in other places. Yeah. And I think that's pretty crazy. Mm-hmm. Scandinavia is really unique in that way. Like, in that, and there's a lot of people that do really beautiful things. We've got to give back. We've got to make the right choices. We have to do the right things. We have to speak up and do the best we can. It's like walk the walk. Don't just talk about the walk.
Yep. Absolutely.
And it's hard. I mean, is it hard to get up in the morning and train for 300 miles? Is it hard to ask people to donate money? Yes. Nobody likes sticking their hand out and asking, but we do it because we believe in the right cause.
Yeah, we believe it's the right way forward.
So what's next?
Drink of water. I want to keep doing what we're doing, and I think we're making a positive impact on the way people cook, eat, and live, whether it be, cook at home, eat out at restaurants like Jackrabbit or anywhere else, and then frankly live, and wherever that leads Jacobsen as a company is kind of remains to be seen. But I know that we have. I could spend the rest of my life just continuing to do what we are doing right now with Jacobsen, and still never, get every person on the planet eating great salt. So I want to continue to have my balance, ride my bike, run. I'm going to the Grand Canyon to run with Gabriel Rucker and Michael and Willie, 3 buds of mine.
When is that?
At the end of September. Gregory Gourdet was going to go with us, but he's got a work thing. But we just Gregory and a couple of other guys and I ran 19 miles on Sunday, 4,600 feet of climbing, and it was my longest ever run, and it kicked my ass. But
I mean, that's serious. I mean, you're not only are you talking about the running, which is pounding on your system, you're talking elevation gain, and then I honestly think the elevation gain isn't the big issue. It's the coming back down, which is way more difficult as a runner because you are more apt to hurt your ankle.
100%.
You're running down a hill. The angle in which your body's moving can be detrimental to both your ankles and your knees. Yeah. And it's really picking your line, learning how to run. That's very serious.
Yeah. It's funny. Like physically, of course I was tired at the end of it, I was more than tired. I was demolished. But at the end of the run on Sunday, what hurt the most were my it was like lower calf and then heels. My knees didn't even hurt, knock on wood.
It's your arches and everything because you're going at an angle.
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
at a steep angle back down, and I think it's funny. Everybody thinks it's the up that's the hardest part. Yeah, the up is hard. The down is harder because you're actually using more muscles to slow you down than you are to force you up.
And just control your movement.
Control your movements.
Yeah.
It's like perception versus reality.
Big time. Yeah. Yeah. So this run is, I think, September 27th. And Willie, the guy that we're going with, has run this, a dozen times.
How many miles is it?
15 miles the first day, 25 the second, 15 the third.
And are you running in the base of the canyon, or?
We're going to start from the top and run down.
Cool.
And then run back up. So each and every day, and he's got, kind of routes planned out for us. I'm pretty heat sensitive. And so I don't think it's going to be a challenge to get the group to start early, but I want to, hopefully start before sunrise. And
do you have a Camelback?
I've got not a Camelback, but I've got like a friend of mine.
They make a vest that works really well.
Vest, yeah. And I'm able to keep 2 liters of water on me on the vest.
The Camelback makes a really good running vest.
Oh, really?
And then the other thing you do is you can freeze the water, and your body temperature will melt the water as you're running.
Oh shit, that's a great idea.
So your core temp's cold as you're going, and it slowly melts as you run, and you can drink it, and the water's there, and then it still has pockets in the front for food. It's called a vest.
Cool.
They really make it good. But while you're there, if you can, try to connect with some folks from the Wallapai tribe.
Okay.
Really beautiful, amazing Native American tribe, indigenous people there. That is their land. And they're incredible. I was fortunate enough to meet them when we filmed Top Chef Masters, and we cooked on the edge of the Grand Canyon.
Oh my God.
But they're amazing people, and they have a lot of beautiful history to share. And it'll be crazy. If a storm comes in, you'll notice it'll actually stay within the canyon. The rain will stay.
Oh, wow, crazy.
Because of just the nature of force of the canyon. It holds the rain in the canyon. It's cool. I'm excited for you guys.
If you have any contacts there, email me if you could, because I would love to connect. I'm going to ride my motorcycle from here to there, and so I'm going to have time on the back end of the run to
make sure you go out there's a bridge. It just goes out. It's like a straight out clear glass, and you can look down over the canyon.
Oof.
That's really, really cool. That's on their land, their land there. And that's actually really cool to go check out. You guys can probably go see that. But it's a very humbling experience to stand there. I can't imagine running it. How many days of running again? 3. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Plenty,
of up and down.
Plenty enough for me.
So where will you guys be staying? Will you be camping?
No, we're still going to stay in like some cheap motel. And my dream is to like come back, around 1 o'clock or something, hopefully every day, and like get a plate full of food, like covered in cheese probably, and just like eat and nap and that's it.
Oh my God! All right, so I do a flash round, pretty straightforward. But there's one more thing I want to talk about before I do the flash round is, can you tell everybody about Ben's Friends and what's going on with that, and how you connected with Gabe and what's going on?
Yeah. So, Gabriel Rucker, chef owner at Canard, Le Pigeon, and Little Bird, and Gregory Gourdet, chef at Departure, are both really good friends of mine, and I think it was Gabriel that asked me, and both of them are sober. And Gabriel asked me, hey, I'm starting this, kind of getting this group together of organization called Ben's Friends. Has nothing to do with Ben, my first name, but it has to. But that's just what the organization is called. But it's a group for, and it's not AA. It's a group for food and beverage industry professionals to seek help and support in sobriety. And it's a very, very difficult industry. And I want to be clear, I'm not sober, and I don't I drink alcohol and all of that, but I have friends who are sober. And at first I didn't really know if it was okay for me to kind of have a beer in front of Gabriel or Gregory or whoever I was hanging out with. But I soon learned and asked them, like, hey, are you okay with this? And so ultimately it's a group of people that are there to support each other in a very, very difficult industry. We're constantly surrounded by alcohol and drugs. And so what Gabriel and Gregory are doing at Ben's Friends is just powerful. It's supporting our community from the ground up. And I've had and our Jacobsen's involvement is simply that we give them space, and at our headquarters in Southeast Portland, and we give them the space to meet. And that's a tiny piece of what we can do to help support my friends and help support the community in which we're a very integral piece of. For anybody out there that's seeking help with sobriety, then Ben's Friends in Portland, and then there are other chapters around the country. Ben's Friends is most definitely an outlet for that, and it's a great group of folks.
And just to be clear on that, it's no judgment. What happens in those walls stays in those walls. It's a really great organization, and I know it's just branched out into Austin.
Yes,
with Chef Philip Spear, really doing great things.
Yeah.
So now we're just going to do a quick round. Ready?
Yes, chef.
You set?
Yes.
Chocolate, fruit.
Fruit.
Nigiri, sashimi.
Nigiri.
Beef or pork.
Beef.
Coffee or tea.
Coffee for sure.
Wow. Hot dog, hamburger.
Depends on what kind of hot dog. You talking like the shitty hot dogs or like an OP hot dog?
Come on, encased meats. They're pretty magic.
I mean, if I had my druthers, I'd do a hamburger.
A hamburger. Oh, the one here we made with ham. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that one.
Playing to my audience here.
Beef or pork?
Beef.
Beef.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Red or white?
Red. I'm really enjoying different types of wine now, but there's a bar in Portland called Bar Norman. Have you been there?
No, I don't drink.
Okay, yeah, of course. Every podcast I've listened to, you're like, oh yeah, I love bubbles.
I do love bubbles. I mean, that's the thing. I had to stop because of the mix with my medication.
Yep.
So I take mental health medication.
Yep.
And upon recommendation from my doctor, said, well, the basic translation is you take crazy pills not to be crazy. So if you take crazy pills and mix alcohol, you're super fucking crazy. So which one would you prefer, to be mildly crazy or super fucking crazy?
And which one would your wife prefer?
Which one would my wife prefer? So I made a choice for my health to choose not to drink alcohol.
Yeah.
And I do miss the flavor profiles. I do miss, I do like gin. I do like beer. I do like champagne or really, really like crisp whites. But I just can't anymore.
Yeah.
Because it really has a bad interaction with my medicine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, knowing and owning it, I think is half the issue.
I get that for sure.
And I think it's been a good judgment call on my part.
Good.
Making good judgment calls is not always easy in our business.
Nope.
It's very hard. And I think that's why it's really important of why, you're mentioning and talking about Ben's Friends and hosting them. It's like, you do drink alcohol.
Yes.
And none of them are going to judge you for drinking alcohol. Correct. They choose to not.
Yes.
And I think it is a very difficult thing. Like you mentioned, do I drink alcohol in front of them? Is it okay to have a beer? And it's not like you're doing that at the Ben's Friends meetings, but just in general in everyday life, it's very hard to be at a food and wine event and not drink alcohol.
Yes.
Because it's part of the social aspect of being, whether it's a food and wine festival or at a restaurant or at a dinner or holidays, right? So that's a very hard conversation to have.
Yep.
And I think that's a really relevant point that you make, that, you don't choose to not drink, but you want to give the support to people that choose not to.
Absolutely. And I want to help, if we can, remove any sort of negative stigma around people that don't drink. And because there's nothing wrong or bad about that. It's just like,
it's a life choice.
It's a life choice. And people are, and frankly speaking, the people that are choosing sobriety are oftentimes a hell of a lot stronger than the people who are not choosing sobriety. And so we should be lifting those people up even more.
I mean, I think everybody that chooses not to drink alcohol should have a lifetime sponsorship from a sparkling water company.
I agree.
I can't begin to tell you how much. I mean, Gabe, I know, drinks tons of sparkling water. I drink tons of. We sat there. I think we drank 4 liters together in front of each other one day when we did our podcast together. But no, I think it's really important. So, well, I'm gonna let you get on with your day. I think you have some salt to shake. Literally.
Yes, thank you.
No, thank you for being here. And guys, everybody, if you're interested, please take a look online. You can order from Ben direct, but you can also find his products at Williams-Sonoma. Great product, great honey. Check it out. Cheers.